Well, thanks. It's so great to be here with you and to get to know Aaron and Emily. And you guys have a really cool church. It reminds us, Kathy and me, of a church we led for 25 years. And so it's great to be here. Well, three guys one night were playing poker, and the later it got, the conversation turned a little serious. And one guy said, "Hey, what do you want people to say about you at your funeral?" And the first guy, who was a doctor, said, "I want people to say I was a brilliant doctor who saved hundreds of lives." And the second guy said, "Well, I want people to say I was a dedicated family man and I left a legacy through my kids." And the third guy said, "I want them to say, look, he's moving." Well, believe it or not, more and more in our age of modern medical resuscitation are saying, look, he's moving. Do you know that the Gallup poll did a survey and found out that 1 out of 25 Americans has had what's called a near-death experience. That's like 13 million Americans, and that's consistent all around the world as well. Now, there's nothing really new about this. Jesus brought Jairus' daughter and Lazarus back from the dead. But if you're still skeptical, I get it, because when I first encountered these, I was skeptical. I was actually an agnostic. I thought Jesus was just a good man turned legend. God, there's just no evidence. And then my dad was dying of cancer. And someone gave him the very first book that was on research about this, that coined the term near-death experience. And I saw it on his bedside table. And because he was dying, I saw it and I was very curious, and I start reading it. And I read about these people who are clinically dead, no heartbeat, no brain waves, and yet they're brought back, they're resuscitated to say that they were more alive than they've ever felt, in a place more real than this has ever felt, and in the presence of this God of light and love. Many of them saw Jesus. And again, I'm an agnostic, and I'm reading this going, oh my gosh, this might actually be evidence. And so it opened my mind and my heart, and I start reading and studying the Bible because of how many talked about seeing God in Jesus. And I came to faith in Christ. Now, I ended up going from a career in engineering, ultimately to becoming a pastor and starting a church. But over the last about 40 years, I've just had this insatiable curiosity, and I've studied or interviewed close to 1,500 cases of clinical death, where people literally are dead, and yet they come back. And in 2015, I wrote a book called Imagine Heaven, where I show that about 40 commonalities that they consistently say happens in this journey into the afterlife perfectly aligns with the scriptures. And then a year and a half ago, I wrote a book called Imagine the God of Heaven, where I've interviewed 70 people on every continent around the globe who encountered the exact same God of light and love, who is personal. And I'm showing who this God is, and how I believe these are his testimonies in our globally connected world that he is the God of all nations. Now, before I dive in, I just want to say, but I'm still skeptical of any one near-death experience. I don't believe everything every near-death experiencer says, and I don't think you should either. What I look for are the consistent commonalities of what they report and how it aligns with the scriptures, not necessarily how they interpret what they report. And those two things can be different. And here's why. Because literally they're having an experience beyond this world, okay? Imagine, we're living a three-dimensional experience right now, right? But imagine if we were living this out on a flat black and white painting, on your wall. And we have up and down, we have side to side, but we don't even have the dimension in or out. That's a third dimension we don't have. And death means separations when your soul leaves your body. So imagine at death, your two-dimensional soul peels off that flat black and white world and comes into this three-dimensional world that was all around you. You can even see what's going on in your flat world because it's contained within this greater dimensionality. And then imagine getting resuscitated in 2 dimensions, pressed back into that two-dimensional world. And now you have to explain experiencing 3 dimensions of color in black and white 2-dimensional terms. How would you do it? And that's exactly what they say it's like. It's an experience in dimensionalities beyond ours. So they have to interpret to some degree. But I want you to hear how consistently the things they report on are. And I'm going to let you hear a few of them. And I want you to hear some of the people I've interviewed. And I want you to notice, too, these are not sketchy, wacko people. These are doctors, medical doctors, college professors, commercial airline pilots, who have a lot to lose talking about heaven, and yet they say this was the most real thing that's ever happened. Watch as Dr. Mary Neal describes her experience.
Dr. Mary Neal is an orthopedic surgeon who shares her medical practice and her love for outdoor adventure with her husband, Bill. In 1999, they planned an adventure that took Mary on a spiritual journey few have taken and returned to talk about.
My husband and I really enjoy kayaking. We enjoy traveling. We speak Spanish. We've traveled internationally a number of times. And so for my husband's birthday, I said, okay, this is the year we're going to do it. So we went to Chile for a vacation to kayak.
After a week of kayaking, Bill sat out the final day with a sore back. Mary and the rest of their group kayaked through a treacherous stretch of the river.
These are drops of 10 to 15 feet, 20 feet maybe, which for an experienced kayaker is not a crazy thing. I went over the main drop, and as I crested over the drop, I could see the tremendous turbulence and tremendous volume. And as I hit the bottom of the drop, the front end of my boat became pinned. I and my boat were immediately and completely submerged. I was absolutely pressed to the front deck of the boat. And I couldn't move my arms even back far enough to reach my spray skirt, let alone push myself out. I very sincerely asked that God's will be done, and I meant it.
After several minutes of searching, the group leaders realized Mary was trapped under the falls.
They came out on the rocks and they kept trying to get to the boat, but the force and the volume of the water was such that they just kept being flushed through. I mean, they just couldn't get to me. At one point, they sort of recognized that it was really turning into body recovery, not so much of a rescue. I know I've been underwater too long to be alive, yet I feel more alive than I've ever felt. And this is more real than anything I've ever experienced.
Mary told me that she was dead for 30 minutes. That's what the people resuscitating her saw. And imagine this day that maybe you feared the most, but instead of fear, Mary said she didn't die, she became more alive. And herself, but in a new body. So you're out of your body, but you're in a new body, a spiritual body. And many times, like Mary, she was up above the river and for a while watching the resuscitation. And they say they're themselves, but not with 5 senses, more like 50 senses. In other words, more alive than you've ever felt. But you know, this is what started to convince me when I was still a skeptical engineer, and has convinced many skeptical medical doctors, because while they're out of their body, many times they can see and report on what's happening during their resuscitation, and it checks out when they are resuscitated. So I've interviewed many medical doctors who actually became convinced that this is not just brain-based, it can't be. Like cardiologist Dr. Michael Sabum. He told me he set out to disprove near-death experiences. He read the same book I did back about 40 years ago and set out to disprove them. And then he starts asking his patients, and they start telling him some of the same things. He said to me, Pete and other patients like him told me that he had left his body during his first cardiac arrest and watched the resuscitation. And when I asked him to tell me exactly what he saw me doing, he described the resuscitation with such detail and accuracy, I could have later used the recording to teach physicians. He said they gave such accurate detail of the practice of resuscitation, they couldn't have possibly known that. He said in another case, one guy noticed a physician who failed to wear scuffs over his white shoes during the guy's open heart surgery. And after 5 years of study, he actually published his findings in the Journal of the American Medical Association, in JAMA, saying that this cannot be brain-based. It's something else. And another doctor, Dr. Jeffrey Long, who you'll hear in a little bit, read the findings in JAMA and said, no, there's no such thing as that. And then he starts interviewing his patients and hears more and more of the same accounts. And Dr. Jeff has studied over 1,000 of them like I have. And here's what Jeff says. By studying thousands of detailed accounts of NDEs, near-death experiencers, I found the evidence that led to this astounding conclusion. NDEs provide such powerful scientific evidence that it's reasonable to accept the existence of an afterlife. This is a medical professional looking at the data. And this is all over the world. Another cardiologist in Holland was Dr. Pim van Lommel, who I also interviewed. He was in the ER one night when a man was found dead in a park. Took about 20, 30 minutes to get him in the ambulance in to the ER. He said they went to shock him and the nurse found dentures, needed to intubate him, took the dentures out, put him in the lower drawer of the crash cart, intubated him, they shocked him, his heart started again while in ER. But he never came to in ER. They wheeled him out, and a week later in another room, the patient comes to. And he's complaining, you lost my dentures. Where are my dentures? And then he sees a nurse in the hallway and he says, that nurse, get that nurse. That nurse knows where my dentures are. And then he goes on to explain that he was in the room, in the ER, who came in, the doctors and nurses and what they look like, and how that nurse took his dentures and put it in the lower drawer of that cart with all the bottles on it. And they go and look, and sure enough, that's where they find his dentures. And Dr. van Lommel writes this report up with some other data that he did in The Lancet, Europe's most prestigious medical journal. Because this shows verifiable evidence that this is not just brain-based, that the soul really does live on. Another doctor, Dr. Jan Holden, did a study of about 100 cases of cardiac arrest who had had near-death experiences. Each one may make 5 or 10 observations before they're resuscitated. And she found that 92% of their observations were completely accurate. Another 6% were mostly accurate. There might be some variations of detail. Only 2% were inaccurate. And that turned out to be one patient in the study. So this grounds this experience in our reality. And again, I don't think this is new. You know, I think the Apostle Paul may have had a near-death experience when he got stoned to death in Lystra. Remember in Acts chapter 14? Stoned to death with rocks, by the way. I'm in Colorado. I got to make sure that's clear. So it says this in Acts chapter 14. They stoned Paul and dragged him out of town thinking he was dead. But the believers gathered around him. He got up and went back into the town, which I would not do if they had just stoned me to death, right? But obviously this was some kind of miraculous resuscitation because they knew how to kill people with rocks back then. But here's interestingly what Paul says later in 2 Corinthians 12 about himself. He said, I was caught up to the third heaven 14 years ago. Was that time in Lystra? Maybe. Whether I was in my body or out of my body, I don't know. Only God knows. Why didn't he know? Because we are still ourselves and we have a spiritual body, a new body. But I do know I was caught up to paradise and heard things so astounding they cannot be expressed in words, things no human is allowed to tell. And NDEs even talk about how some of the things they saw and knew they weren't allowed to bring back, but other stuff they were. Now, Paul goes on to talk about this spiritual body, right? In 1 Corinthians 15, he said, our bodies are buried in brokenness, but they're raised in glory. They're buried in weakness, but they'll be raised in strength. But that Greek word is dunamai, from which we get our word dynamite. They're raised in power. They're buried natural human bodies, but they're raised spiritual bodies. And fascinatingly, near-death experiencers describe these powers of this spiritual body, like eyesight that's telescopic and communication that's just pure, thought to thought, heart to heart, no misunderstanding, movement that is sometimes like floating or flying or just there in an instant. But here's the thing you've got to understand. It's life. And you're still yourself, but you're more alive than you've ever felt. And that's what they consistently say. You know, so many people have such a horrible view of heaven. I mean, even Christians. You know, they picture this wispy, ethereal experience. You don't really touch, nothing's really tangible. Or they say it's going to be like an endless worship service. I'm a pastor. That sounds horrible to me, all right? You know, I mean, it's good for a while, but anything gets boring. But it's not like that at all. It's life, but life where time is no longer an enemy. You know what near-death experiencers tell me when they come back? That this existence feels like the shadow, that feels like the real thing. And that's fascinating because in Hebrews chapter 8, it talks about how God showed Moses a pattern of the tabernacle and in heaven. And it says that the priests serve in a system of worship, meaning the tabernacle, that's only a copy, a shadow of the real one in heaven. So just think, what if all this is just a shadow of the real one? Imagine the beauty that we'll experience, but beauty in new dimensions. So after people leave their body and they often see their resuscitation, they say many times a portal or a tunnel opens up and they travel. Sometimes they have angels there and they're just out through our atmosphere and beyond. But all of them come to this place of exquisite beauty. Paul said, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. But it's not unlike earth, but it's so much more than earth. You know, it's interesting. Isaiah was taken up to heaven. And Isaiah 6, he says he hears the angels say, holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. Now think about that. You know, all the beauty, everything you love about this earth, God created, right? And it reflects his glory. It reflects something about the beauty and the wonders of the Creator. And yet this earth is messed up. It's wounded. Paul goes on to tell us that. Romans chapter 8, for all creation is waiting eagerly for the day when God will reveal who his children really are. Against this will, all creation was subjected to God's curse. But with eager hope, the creation looks forward to the day when it will join God's children in glorious freedom from death and decay. For we know that all creation has been groaning, like in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time. See, this earth, even in all its beauty and wonder, is laboring. It's laboring under disease and death and decay. And the reason God does that is he doesn't want you to hold on to this life like it's going to last. It's not going to last, no matter how hard you try. But there is a life that lasts. There's a place that God has prepared for us, and it's more real and beautiful and alive than anything we've ever experienced here. Listen to how Dean Braxton, who was a court supervisor who had sepsis in the hospital and he died. He has hospital records showing he had no heartbeat or brain waves for an hour and 45 minutes. And then was miraculously brought back. Captain Dale Black was a commercial airline pilot who was in an airplane crash in Burbank, California. No one else survived, but he came back. And listen to how he and Dr. Mary Neal and others describe the beauty of heaven they experienced. Watch.
Things were more beautiful than I could ever imagine. It was past anything that I would believe that it would be like.
The colors were so alive that the most beautiful day on earth is just a reflection of those colors.
The greens were greener, the yellows, the golds, the blues, everything reminded me that earth is a reflection of heaven, but heaven is perfection.
So one of the commonalities of near-death experiences is they experience beauty in new dimensions of time and space. Flowers, trees, mountains, forests, in colors more vibrant than we can imagine. And they are not limited in their experience of beauty like we are here.
About 52% of people having a near-death experience describe beauty in this heavenly realm that is beyond anything on earth, things that are absolutely spectacular.
It seemed like everything there was glad I was there. The trees were glad I was there, the flowers were glad I was there, the water was glad I was there. Everything was alive, there was nothing dead, and everything was intelligent.
Everything was far more intense. The colors, the aromas, the flowers were such that I felt that I could not only see them, but I understood them.
Gorgeous, beautiful, all of the adjectives, but it's beyond words.
So can you imagine the day that we get to explore all of God's creation in ways we've never imagined here on earth, and not alone, together? Because heaven was meant for relationship. And that's another commonality of what people say, that many times in this place of beauty, they have this welcoming committee of people, of friends and relatives who come to greet them. And you know, so many people worry that we're not going to be ourselves, you know, we won't remember each other, and nothing could be further from the truth. You know, God said love is what it is all about, to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Why would God rip apart what he says is most important to him? He doesn't. And that's why Jesus said this to his closest friends his last night on earth. He said, "There is more than enough room in my Father's home. I'm going to prepare a place for you. And when everything is ready, I'll come to get you so that you will always be with me where I am." Marv Bestman was a bank president who died in a hospital after surgery in a hospital in Michigan. And he recalls, first of all, kind of funny, he said he was in a hospital gown in the hospital. These two angels come, and as he's traveling, he notices he's now wearing his favorite golf outfit. It was kind of fun, all right? But he says he comes, and there's this welcoming party, he called it, consisting of friends and relatives. And he said, both of my friends there were prayer warriors. We'd spent many hours praying together. I'm not sure if that's why God chose these two guys for me to see. They were significant to me in my spiritual life. Everyone I saw had been influential in shaping my life in some way. And think about that. The influence you have on people here goes on with you. Another woman who died giving birth said, "I recognized my grandmother and a girl I had known when I was in school, and many other relatives and friends. It was a very happy occasion. I felt they had come to greet me and guide me and protect me." Okay, interestingly, Dr. Mary Neal said the same thing, that her welcoming committee came to greet her and guide her on her journey to heaven and protect her. And I always ask, protect you from what? And she said, "I don't know. I just intuitively knew they were there to protect me." Okay, now that's important because I need to give a little word of warning. These near-death experiencers are not seeing all there is of this vast world to come. They're just seeing a tiny slice. And so that's why we got to be careful. They can interpret it many different ways, right? So you got to look at the totality, because this is just a small bit of all there is to see. It's kind of like we've all seen Mount Rushmore, right? But not many people realize there's another side of Mount Rushmore that not many people have seen. It's not all nice, is it? Now, seriously, so these near-death experiencers, you know, one of the commonalities is they say they come to a border or a boundary that they knew they couldn't cross over and still come back to earth. So whatever these are, it is not crossing either into eternal life or eternal death. It's something in between. God's giving a peek, a reality of the reality of all that's to come. And so what that means is we can't learn from near-death experiencers what's beyond that border or boundary, but we can know they're testifying to a lot of what's true. That's why we have to go to the scriptures to learn about that, because that's what God's revealed. And then interpret near-death experiences in light of what God's revealed in the scriptures. Because he's already told us all this. In fact, Jesus even talks about the welcoming committee in Luke 16 when he says, use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. And then when your earthly possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. Amazing. That's exactly what near-death experiencers describe. So listen as Karen Marshall, who is a woman in our church actually, and Don Piper, who is a pastor and an author. He was run over by an 18-wheeler, declared dead for 90 minutes while the jaws of life cut him out of that. Charlotte and Dale and others, listen as they describe relationship on the other side.
Many people who have had a near-death experience say that they have this welcoming committee, they call it, of friends or relatives mainly who had died already, and they come and they greet them. And just imagine what that might be like.
My family appeared. One of them put their hand out, and I knew it was my grandmother.
And when I looked up, there's my family. Everybody that had been related to me, a part of my family, came to greet me in. My grandmother Mary was out front. She was bright, she had a big smile and pure joy.
I was immediately greeted by a group of people, spirits, beings. They were absolutely exploding with a pure love. And I could be with them, and I knew without any doubt that I had known them and loved them as long as I've existed.
57.3% of those having near-death experience describe meeting other beings. When a deceased loved one is encountered during a near-death experience, they may be around the age they died, or interestingly, they may appear decades younger.
I'm surrounded by people that I had known and loved in life, and they were all perfect in every way, fully recognizable as themselves.
Pero me fijé, cuando miré para derechito, miré a mi mamá y a mi tío.
I'm looking at this man who I recognize by my heart, but I knew that that was Pa. He's my great-grandfather. Now, Pa was standing next to Ma. I knew her as an old woman when I was a kid. When she was in heaven, she looked to be in her 30s. This was my family.
On this right side of me were all these animals coming in. You'll be surprised when you get there and your pet's there to greet you in.
And that's the number one question I get. Forget about the aunts and uncles and people. Who cares? What about my dog? So, okay, good news. So, but we're ourselves. We hug, we kiss. They feel the hugs, but even deeper. We have our memories. We joke and laugh, but your jokes are funny there. It's life continued on. That's what Jesus said. And interestingly, after this, many of them then see this God of light who is love, and in God's presence, they get a life review. Now, this is fascinating because in Imagine the God of Heaven, I report on people all over the globe, and they have the same experience. And what's even more fascinating, another thing that really convinced me, is even people blind from birth, when they have a near-death experience, can see. And they see all the same things that sighted people in their near-death experience see, except when they come back, they're still blind. Like Vicki, who I report on in Imagine Heaven. She was 22, died in a car accident. She's up above her body, and she's trying to adjust to this new perception called sight. She sees her body on the operating table and realizes, because of her long hair and an orange blossom that she had on her wedding ring, that must be me. I must be dead, but I feel great. And she's trying to tell the people, don't panic, I'm okay. She can't get their attention. She's like, I know where I'm going. She knew Jesus. She said, I'm out of here. And she goes. And she travels and comes out into this garden of incredible beauty. And she said, grass and flowers and trees and vast numbers of people coming toward her in this place of tremendous light. And listen to what Vicki said. The light was something you could feel as well as see. what the light conveyed was love. And there was love everywhere. It was like light and love came out of the grass, out of the birds, out of the trees, even out of the people coming toward me. It was incredible, really beautiful. And I was overwhelmed by that experience because I couldn't really imagine what light was like. Now, here's what's fascinating. In the 2 books I've written, I report on 6 people blind from birth, and they all describe the light of heaven, just like sighted near-death experiencers do, as light that is love and life all together coming out of everything. Now, where would a blind person ever have heard light works like that? They wouldn't. They would hear light shines on you and they feel the heat of it. It doesn't feel like love, right? Especially not if you get sunburned. Not at all. But here's the amazing thing. They're reporting what John, who was taken to heaven by Jesus, reports in Revelation 21 when he says, the city has no need of sun or moon, the city of God, for the glory of God illuminates the city, and the Lamb, Jesus, is its light. And look at this, the nations will walk in its light. And she said even the people were bursting forth like Mary did with this light that also conveyed love. And look at what Jesus said in Matthew 13. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. And what I came to realize is this light that we all share in, that sometimes we experience coming out of each other to each other, that conveys not only light but love and life. It's very glory of God that we share in. Paul said this, we will share in God's glory if we share in his sufferings. So imagine sharing the very love and life of the source of it all. And that's what they commonly say. So then Vicki turns and sees this light brighter than any of them by far, and yet she knows who this is. It's Jesus. She recognizes him and describes him kind of as you would imagine Jesus, except she comes and runs up and hugs him. She feels his beard, but she said light was coming out of his beard. And he says to her, would you like to review your life? And she says yes. Now, this life review happens in a different realm of time. That's important to know. Just like Peter said in 2 Peter 3:8, to the Lord a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like a day. Near-death experiencers say almost the same thing. Like, there was no time, some of them say. Or some say there was time, but you had all the time in the world at each moment of time. So they relive a panoramic replay of their entire life, not just watching it, but also remembering what they were thinking and feeling. But also God lets them many times experience what the other people they interacted with were thinking and feeling, and even the ripple effects of it through humanity. The emphasis is always on relationship. And Vicki actually sees in her life review the way the kids, she grew up in a home for blind children, how some of them walked and acted and things that she could not have seen, and when she came back, it all checked out with her house mother. But how in the world could she have known? Yet she saw in her life review. Now, the life review is not, it's not the judgment. That comes out at the end of human history, but this is just the truth of what Jesus said in Matthew 10 when he said, there's nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. And then Paul said, judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait until the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and expose the motives of the heart. And at that time, each will receive their praise from God. Now, I want you to hear that because everyone fears the life review. I get it. I mean, there are things I'm not eager to rewatch with Jesus, okay? But the life review is not to condemn us. It's actually to reward us. That's what he said, to receive our praise from God. The life review, yes, you see your good and your bad. It shows our need for what God did for us through Jesus that first Easter, that he paid for all our wrongs, that we can't do away with them. They're in the past, but he paid for them. But he also is showing how every little act of kindness matters to him. That's what he said in Matthew 25. Go read it. And so in this life review, people realize that, they're here for a purpose, and everything, every interaction matters. It counts when it's done to love God and to love people. And the other thing you need to know is it's never too late for anyone. God is the God of the second chance and the third and the fourth, endless chances to turn back to him and receive his forgiveness offered through Christ. And it really doesn't matter where you've been or what you've done. But here's the thing, don't reject him, because if you don't want God, he'll give you what you think you want. But you don't want that. Howard Storm was a tenured college professor who was an atheist. He was on a tour, an art tour in Paris when his lower intestine ruptured. It was a Saturday. They couldn't find a surgeon to operate on him. And after 8 hours, he died. Now, Howard told me, I thought when you die, it's just unplug the computer, nothing. And so what he said is, suddenly I was standing by my bed and I didn't know I was dead. He said, I felt better than I've ever felt before. And then this group of nice people that are in the hallway are calling to him. They looked like they were hospital staff, but he couldn't quite make them out. And they're saying, Howard, come with us. He's like, I need surgery. And they said, oh, we know all about you. We've been waiting for you. Come, don't you want to get better? Come with us. And he begins to follow them. Now, if Howard had been resuscitated at that moment, his interpretation would have been, hey, as an atheist, it's all good. You live on afterwards. Atheists go to heaven. It's all great. Nice people. But he followed them, and they deceived him, and they led him into this darkness, just like Jesus described. An outer darkness, he said, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Howard said they turned on him and just mauled him. He said, imagine the worst prison scene you can possibly imagine times 1,000. And in this horrible place, and by the way, one study done found that 23% of people having a near-death experience said theirs was hellish. So we can't just take the good and leave the bad. We have to account for both. Howard had not crossed over, I believe, that border or boundary into eternity. And as a result, in this place, this horrific place, he remembers when he was taken to Sunday school as a kid, the song, Jesus Loves Me. And in his desperation, he cries out, Jesus, save me. And he said, into the darkness comes a pinpoint of light, gets brighter and brighter till it's brighter than the sun, like 1,000 times. Arms reach out, pick him up, and take him out of there. And he said, as Jesus is holding him in front of the angels, he gets a life review. I want you to hear Howard's life review, and then I want you to hear Dr. Mary Neal's life review. And they're a little different, but the same, of showing the totality of what this life review is about. Watch.
Howard, tell us about this life review that you had.
There was a number of angels, I call them angels, who had been recording my entire life, all my life. And Jesus wanted them to play out in chronological order the scenes of my life. And the entire emphasis was on my interaction with other people. Of course, initially starting out with my mother and father and my sisters, and then, school and friends. And
so you saw it, or you
we saw it,
experienced
we felt it, we experienced it. It was really interesting because it was, the whole emphasis was on people and not on things. Matter of fact, there were some instances where I had won promotions, honors, awards, and they skipped them. And I said to Jesus, you're skipping the most important thing in my life. This is what I lived for, to get this award, Kentucky Artist of the Year. Big banquet in my honor and a big cash prize and everything. And he said, that's not what we're here for you to see. That's not important. What I want you to see is how you treated the students. So what I learned in my life review was that the relationship with my father, I had participated in the breakdown of that relationship as much as he did. He was not a good father to me, and I resented it, and I was angry at him, so I did everything I could subconsciously and sometimes consciously, to be as rebellious and as cold-hearted towards him as possible, which only aggravated him more and made him more of a hostile father. So the things that I had seen in my life that where I was the victim and everybody else was the bad guy, I came to find out it was a two-way street. We were both the plainest games. As my life progressed from my adolescence into my adulthood, I saw myself turning completely away from God, church, all that, and becoming a person who decided that life was all about the biggest, baddest bear in the woods wins. And now I began to experience Jesus and the angels' literal pain.
What do you mean?
Emotional pain with watching scenes in my life. And like, here's the nicest, kindest, most loving being I've ever met, who I realize is my Lord, my Savior, even my Creator, holding me and supporting me, trying to give me more understanding of my life. And it was figuratively, not literally, like I was like stabbing him in the heart as we're watching this stuff. And the last thing I wanted to do was to hurt him. And I don't want to hurt him to this day. Jesus is a very feeling man. God is a very feeling creator.
What were you seeing played out?
I saw scenes where my sister was in bed crying, and I got up in the middle of the night and went in and put my arms around her and hugged her. And Jesus and the angels were so filled with joy that I had been willing to do that, to try and, help her a little bit in her grief. But those were rare, the scenes of my indifference. Just seeing people as objects in order to maneuver around through or, to shift to further my goals and my ambitions.
We did go through a life review, and it was nothing like I would have imagined.
What was the life review like?
My life was laid bare for all its good and bad. And one of the things we did was look at many, many, many events throughout my life that I would have otherwise called terrible or horrible or sad or bad or tragic. And instead of looking at an event in isolation or looking at how it impacted me and my little world, I had the most remarkable experience of seeing the ripple effects of the event when seen 25, 30, 35 times removed.
So imagine, one day, God is going to show you how every little act of kindness mattered and even rippled through humanity for good, and he wants to reward you for it. Now, how do you explain Howard, this atheist, tenured college professor? He comes back from this near-death experience and 2 years later leaves his tenured professorship to become a Christian pastor. His wife, who's still an atheist, divorces him because she thinks he's crazy. How do you explain that? Jesus. Jesus is the highlight of heaven, and he is the love you've always wanted. And he's the God of all nations. And in the book, Imagine the God of Heaven, I interviewed these 70 people from every background, every religious background. They are encountering the same God, and when they come back seeking, they discover Jesus. Some of them know in their experience he's Jesus. And you may say, well, why would they see Jesus if they didn't even believe in Jesus? Well, that's what happened with Paul. Remember on the Damascus Road? He's going to arrest and persecute and kill Christians. And it says in Acts 9, as Paul was approaching Damascus on this mission, a light from heaven, this brilliant God of light, suddenly shone around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked, and the voice replied, I'm Jesus, the one you're persecuting. He is the God of light and love. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but have the light of life. And that's what people are testifying to around the globe today. I want you to hear one last account from Captain Dale Black, the commercial airline pilot, who also has a PhD in aeronautical engineering, started 2 multi-million-dollar businesses. And I tell you that because When he talks about looking into the eyes of Jesus, he can't hold it together. None of these people usually can, because the love they re-experience overwhelms their emotions. And listen to how he talks about this border or boundary as he comes up the stairway, the staircase that he knew he couldn't cross and still go back. Listen to his encounter with Jesus.
Did you see Jesus?
Later, I did. That was the last thing that happened. After going through the city and asking questions and going through at the very last moment, I had been ushered closer and closer toward the light, toward the light, toward the light.
The light that's in the center of the city?
Yeah. And then there was a stairway that was near the glass sea, which it looked like a sea, and a stairway that went up, and a large angel with the most power, if we would say that. And it was clear that he was basically in charge of that stairway. And I just began to communicate to this angel heart to heart. Again, it's hard to say, did we talk? It seemed like it, but then it seemed like we didn't. This communication was just impeccably pure. And I began to recognize I can't go up there. I can't go up. I can't go up and still go back. And I was thinking, go back? Go back? What do we mean? What's that mean? And as soon as I'm thinking, go back, the angel moved just to the side. But I looked into the eyes of the warmest, kindest, most wonderful. I knew this was the Son of God. I knew this was my Savior. And all of a sudden, my knees buckled, my legs lost their strength, and I just went down. I couldn't stand. I was not worthy to. I was not worthy to stand in His presence. Funny that I didn't feel worthy to be in heaven, yet I knew I was worthy in the early part. I was somehow granted this authority, but I had this supernatural gift that I was worthy. Somebody had done something for me.
He had.
Yes. And so I'm down on just falling down, and I see His feet, and I grab them, and I hold His feet, and I see the scars. And I know this is the Son of God. He's my Savior. He's my Lord. It is because of Him. He died for everybody. It's so cool because the Bible even says, no, I just take that back. Jesus said that I have come not to condemn the world, but that the world through me will be saved. And it was because of that. He's not condemning anybody. It doesn't matter what you've done in your life, what sins you've done, including murder. It doesn't matter what you've done. All of it is forgivable. God can forgive anybody of anything. And then we have this free gift that we call salvation. You and I know about it.
And that's what you felt at His feet.
Of course. But to describe this experience, I just stopped at His feet and I was worshiping Him down on the ground there. And I heard the voice, Dale, do you love me? That's it. Do you love me? And I'm trying to think of all these words to say. And I'm getting ready to say, in a sense, I'm getting ready to say, but I've said nothing. And I'm getting ready to say, of course I love you, Lord. I remember who you are, what you do. I'm getting ready to say that. And He bends down and whispers into my ear. And I'm now back.
Do you love me? That's really all He wants to know. He created you to love Him. And we love Him by giving our lives back to Him, accepting this gift of forgiveness through Christ, and then walking through life with Him to become more and more of the loving people that He created us to be. That's how we love Him. Well, I'd like to lead us in a prayer. Would you pray with me? And maybe some of you don't know that you're right with God yet, but you can know today. You can know you're right with God. You can know heaven is your destiny. That's what Jesus did. And he looks at your heart, and all you have to do is just tell him, God, I want what Jesus did on the cross to count for me. I want your forgiveness. Come lead my life. And God, thank you that you love us like your own children, and that's why you paid the price, so that's all it takes, a heart turning back to you. And Lord, we want to be people who walk with you through life, experiencing more of your love and sharing more of your love with others. So God, help us, all of us who have accepted your gift, to live in love with you and to demonstrate that love to others every day of our lives. We thank you for the promise of heaven. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Thank you so much.